Hi there, my name is Jasmin Junger, also known as Kuschelirmel all over the internet, and welcome back to a new, episode of whatever this might be, because today we're not doing a classic tutorial walkthrough, whatever type of video. Today I want to talk to you about how do you learn something new. So first, I feel the need for a disclaimer. I'm neither a psychologist nor a professional teacher. I'm an engineer who likes to take pictures and dabble in Photoshop or any other digital art-related program I can get my hands on, really. I am someone who likes to constantly learn new things, and I also like to create tutorials for what I have learned. And I have done so for the last 15 years or so, starting with written tutorials and then at some point moving to the video format. And yeah, recently I have been trying to learn how to use Photoshop's 3D feature. So for fun, I recorded my progress on my image Lost, where I tried the 3D techniques for the first time. And well, I was kind of surprised at the footage that I got. Unedited, it is over 10 hours long, which already excludes watching tutorials, searching for stock, well, for the most part anyway. And yeah, I recorded every misstep, every trial and error, but also every small victory. So I have wriggled this down to half an hour of footage, which means it's sped up a lot and not really usable as any sort of tutorial of itself. If you like, I can do a tutorial on the 3D techniques I'm using, but I really rather want to use this as an example for how I learn new things and to show you that even though I'm just about to show you the 4 basics that I find most useful for myself, it is by no means linear progress. It's not a step-by-step program where you do your research and then do the rest of the steps and arrive at something super great at the end, and then you can say, well, done, you have learned a new skill. It's super chaotic in my world, which maybe it is that way for a lot of people. I don't know. And that is a bit of the tricky thing. I'm going to show you those 4 steps I think are really important, and a little bit about the motivation to learn something new. But what you actually can do with it, or if you can take anything from it, will also depend a lot on what kind of person or what type you are, how you learn things. And so please take everything I say with a grain of salt, and just as here is how I do it, and you can watch me trial, error, fail, do stuff over in the last half an hour of this video, and I hope it will give you some motivation or give you some insight into the fact that you're probably not alone trying and scrapping stuff and trying to figure things out and not being able to sometimes. How do you learn something new? So to me, there are 4 pillars that are important for learning. The first one is research. The second is repeat. The third, engage. And the fourth, understand. So let's take a look at each of them. So research means, to me, someone or something has to teach you the basics. So no matter what you're trying to learn, it's very unlikely that you will have great success without doing some research. This can mean going to school, attending an online course, or reading a book on the subject, but it doesn't have to. And actually, it doesn't have to cost you anything. These days, you can Google what you need, and I'm sure you got plenty of hits all over the internet, from blog entries to YouTube videos. In case you are trying to learn a new program, you can also simply start with the user manual. Often the companies have an extensive online documentation that will also include interactive tutorials or YouTube videos to get you started. The second one is to repeat, and this is there to make you remember the steps. So if you're only doing research, which, let's be honest, these days that often involves binge watching YouTube video tutorials, and you will see all those great things that you can make, but if you watch like 10 YouTube videos of different things all in a row, let's not kid ourselves. You will not retain this step-by-step info in any case. This is more like procrastinating than actually learning. So when you watch a video tutorial, you really need to get into it and actually do the video tutorial. Try to follow the steps. It's a bit like trying to learn a language just by sitting in class. Yes, you will pick up a few basics, but if you do not practice the language and if you do not learn your vocabulary, you will not be able to say anything when it counts. So by repeating steps from tutorials instead of just passively watching, you have a better chance of remembering them, or at least remembering that I saw this cool technique before, and also to remember where to look for it and not to have to go into your watch history and go back like 5 weeks and 15 tutorials and then hopefully find the right one because everything's just a blur. So if you are trying to learn something that is not so program-centric, it's probably less applicable. I mean, it's not going to help you much, the repeating of theories that you have learned, let's say, about history or social issues and stuff like that. You will probably not get much out of them if you just repeat them. It would be just learning them by heart. So in this case, I would say it's more like get more than one opinion on one subject and stick with the subject and get the technical terms to stick through the repetition and get some more views instead of just one. The third pillar is to engage. The idea behind this is that if we can discover something for ourselves, it will stick better. If you only parrot what others do one-on-one, you're essentially just stuffing information in your brain that may or may not keep there, and with which you can do little more than repeat what you did before, and the outcome is always someone else's rather than your own. This is most prominent when we are talking about learning a program for digital art. If you can follow the create this scene step-by-step type of tutorial, it will teach you a lot of individual techniques you can use, but the outcome will always be this scene, which in the beginning is great because you have something clear-cut that you can follow, but if you really want to create your own scenes, this is going to get boring really, really fast. And it's going to limit your personal creativity to a degree that is, that can be frustrating actually. So to combat this, make sure you experiment. This can either be done by changing the elements used in the tutorial and trying to adapt the techniques learned to the new scene. For example, in photo manips, you could use different stock images and follow along. Or you can start on a completely new image of your own and only use tutorials whenever you realize you cannot do it with what you already know. This way you search for techniques rather than outcomes, and it will unleash your creativity while rewarding you with an image that is truly yours. In more general terms, this is the point where you start interacting with what you are learning, by experimenting with what you have learned, or in case of a more abstract learning goal, by challenging the views of your teachers. Find a way to talk about the theories in relation to your own ideas. Ask questions, have a debate. This will help you to actually stand on your own and not just be somebody else's parrot, for lack of a better word. Now the fourth pillar is to really understand what you're doing. Understand the concept and not just follow something step by step. And it is closely linked to the experimenting part, but I wanted to give it its own point, because I think it is more than just what you can do by experimenting. It's when you are at the stage where you look more for techniques than step-by-step info, you're getting closer to understanding what you are actually trying to learn. You will start making connections that let you take a very good guess at what you need to experiment with in order to get the results you're looking for. And this is also where you start to notice similarities and differences between what you're trying to learn and what you already know. If you can see some of these patterns, it will be much easier to have an intuitive feeling for what to do and what not to do, or which way to go and what to try out, even if you have never done the thing you are trying to do. It's a bit like if you learned French in school, but never really liked it because you were forced and French is hard, so you never really used it and thought you'd forgotten all about it anyway. But then, years later, you start learning, say, Italian, because you want to be able to say something when you go on holiday. And after a while, you realize that the French you never liked is actually helping you now, because both languages are Roman languages rooted in Latin, so the structure and the vocabulary are very similar. All of the above sounds like a neat step-by-step plan, but of course there's a catch or two. What I have seen in myself when I try to learn some new skills is that I need to remember two main things not to get frustrated. So the first one is I need to set myself a goal, which is not too big but leaves some room for experimentation. This gives me direction, so I don't as easily fall into the trap of endlessly consuming tutorials, which will make my imagination run wild, but at this point I haven't done anything yet that would help me make the lesson stick. This goal gives me the motivation to get my butt into gear and take action, because if you don't start, you will also never finish. The second one is giving myself permission not to get it perfect on the first try, and to only learn what I need to make my vision come to life. This one makes me stop and enjoy what I have created, while at the same time reminding me that to enjoy something, it doesn't have to be perfect. I do not need to constantly remind myself of what I don't know, but instead I try to focus on what I have already accomplished. And having a finished piece of art to look at, it always makes me feel really accomplished. This leads me to the last point I wanted to make before showing you the sped up process for Lost. Learning something new does not happen overnight. Anyone who tells you that you can do something in no time at all is probably lying. It takes work, it takes repetition, and it is by no means a linear process. This means you are not going to do steps 1 through 4 and come out mastering your new field. Instead, learning is more often than not a very chaotic process where you jump between these steps back and forth. To illustrate this, let me show you some of the footage I recorded and explain my thought process a bit. So I'm starting out with this idea that I had, which I sketched out here in not so great format, but sometimes it's enough if you know where you want to go. So what I wanted to do is to have the word lost in the middle of the screen very prominently, and the O was to be a portal into another world. So to not make it so boring, I wanted to put the individual letters on different heights and have them propped up on some stones or something. I was envisioning a forest in the background and then maybe some mushrooms and stuff at the front, and some sort of stairs that go to the O. So what you can easily see here is that I'm trying to put them in the right order, and I'm trying to put them each on their own layer, each of the letters, because I think that then I can position them on the height, and I have a chance to change things. But I couldn't quite figure out how to get all of the letters when I do them individually into one 3D layer, which by now I have learned. But at the time I didn't know, and I didn't want to spend ages to figure it out. So what I did is to put them all in one smart object and you can still access the smart object. So here I'm trying out all the different sliders and all the different things that is in the 3D panel. So at this point I think I have watched some tutorials weeks or maybe years ago about the 3D stuff, and I have opened it and closed it like you often do. So my basic understanding at this point is that I have the 3D space, I have 3 axes, and the Z-axis is the one going toward me, and I can push not just the letters themselves or this 3D object back and forth, but I can also push individual lights back and forth. So I have one light that is inside of the O, basically giving me this this highlight, or it's just behind the O, so that the other letters also get some of the light. This is basically, if you do photo manipulation, you think about light a lot, then I think this is more or less the easiest of the whole thing, which probably for other people will be the most difficult on the whole 3D thing. But for me, this was kind of, okay, this is what I know. I want the light to be back there, I want it lit from the back, and now how exactly am I going to get something out of these letters that looks more like stone or something? What do I need to do? How do I do it? And this is basically, here you can watch me go through the motions like 10 times because I'm not sure what I'm doing and because I cannot figure out how to revert some of the stuff that I have changed, and I don't like it after all. So this is one of the most time-consuming things that you can do. But for me at least, all this experimenting, it actually helps me make stuff stick. I will more easily remember what I've done, and I will never ever make that mistake of the wrong button again. And I will, when I get to points like this, I will start looking for just the right tutorials to keep me going. So I realized at this point that I probably need to watch some basic 3D video again, maybe the same one that I watched before and couldn't quite remember what to do. I was, basically here I'm actually rendering it out and realizing that all these strange shapes on the extrusion, that they are not just something that is on because it's not rendered and the quality is not really high, but that it is something that is inherent to how I extruded this in the first place. So what I did was not to use the extrude from shape, but the other one, create new mesh or something like that, which will use the values in your image to create a depth map. And because it was all the same color, it has all the same depth and it looks kind of similar to the other one, but it's really not. So here you cannot really change the sides. Probably you can at some point, but I'm not that far advanced yet. And here you can see me actually using Google and the Adobe help guides, which for me always displays in German first, and I have everything installed in English, so I need to switch each time. Thank you. And yeah, yes, I'm an engineer, and yes, I do read the manual sometimes, but don't tell anyone. So after that little reminder of how things work, I'm now actually on an actual 3D extrusion, the way I should have done it from the start, and can access all the side materials and everything. And you can see that the sheer amount of things you can change, the sheer amount of tabs that open up and things you can do, it's a tiny bit overwhelming. So I'm now trying to figure out which of the sides does what, where the colors would be, how to extrude things. And here I'm back on the one merged layer because I could not figure out how to get them all in. PS, you can merge the layers in the layer palette and they go into one 3D layer, but that's just something I learned on the side. Now you can see me fiddling around with the light again, and for some reason I'm managing to put the light where I had it before. I'm managing to change the light color so it will match better with my background. So far so good. I'm managing to change the camera angle because in 3D you need to be aware that the principle of it is that you have your 3D object in 3D space, and basically like in Photoshop you have only the layers, but the third dimension in Photoshop is basically when you stack your layers one on top of the other, you get something like a z-axis. Here you get, because you already have a z-axis, you get a fourth possibility, and this is the camera. So you can position your camera in 3D space, and this is exactly how you need to think about it. Basically like a fourth dimension. So you're in 3D space, but you have a fourth option. And you can either change the object itself and put it on the ground plane or put it up. This will affect your shadows. Or you can simply change your camera angle. And sometimes this might look like the same thing, but it actually is not. Especially when you turn on lights, it definitely isn't. And this is something where the last point of understanding things comes in. So here I understood now finally how to work the camera and the lights, but for some reason I managed to get this like shadow of lost text on the front face, and at this point I had no clue what I had done, but it turned out it was the environment controls somehow. But in the end, yeah, via clicking stuff on and off and making things visible and invisible, I figured out that it must be something that is to do with this environment and that is inherent in what I had done, and that is not just some rendering artifacts that will go away once I render it correctly. So here you can see me again trying to figure out what exactly it is that makes this so weird and what I need to do to make this less weird and what I need to change. And it turns out it was this environment. So sometimes you have to just stick with it and work out what you did wrong, because otherwise I could just have scrapped it right then and there and said, okay, I know what to do, and I will simply save it in between and get it back, which I think at some point I more or less did. But it helps you more if you can figure out what the well you have done wrong than just scrapping it and starting from scratch. This is also something when you follow a tutorial and you miss a step, if you just rewatch the tutorial and say, well, yes, there it is, the missing step, and go on without really thinking about it, it will not help you as much as if you go there and think, okay, why was this missing step so important? Why is it doing this? And here you can see I'm still trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. And in the meantime, seeing a lot more sliders even than I had figured out before. So that is kind of cool. So this is also something, it will help you find a few more things. It will get your creative juices flowing. And once you have figured it out, what the heck was wrong, you will be really glad you did it, because nobody can learn for you. So there is a certain amount of effort and tenacity, however you pronounce that, that you need to have to get through something like that. Especially if it's something that is not really what you would normally do, especially if it's something where you think, well, maybe I can find a fix that doesn't use, in this case, the 3D module. I could just paint them on myself and put the textures on myself. But I was really wanting to know how to do this in a 3D space. Even though from the start I know that the 3D module in Photoshop is limited in terms of what it can do versus what, I don't know, Blender does or some real 3D programs can do. But for my personal creativity, sometimes it is just nice to be able to put something in 3D and don't have to work out all the lights and shadows and have the program do it for you. So you could even just use it as a guide sometimes if you're not so sure how to put your light sources. So I think you can always find some, even if I never use this again, because I see that there are a lot of limitations on it and I cannot get certain things to work, and no matter how hard I try, and then at some point I have to admit that probably it's just a limitation of the program and it just will not let me do what I want to do, at least not in the way I wanted it. But no matter all of this, I will still have some new tools in my arsenal that I can take out if I have an idea that I want to put into action. Because, I mean, most of the times it's the ideas that are not there. Let's be honest. Most of the times you don't just wake up and say, oh, I want to put lost as a text in the middle of the forest and have the O as a gate. Who the fuck comes up with such things? I mean, yeah, sometimes you do, but more often than not you don't. And then you need something else to keep you going or to help you figure out what you could do. And I think these kinds of exercises where you go and learn a bit of a new technique, a bit of a new thing in the program you are anyway working with, it's a really good thing to also to see something new and not to get stuck in whatever you usually do. And there will always be one or two things that you can take with you. And I've just seen that you should not be too hard on yourself if you cannot 100% figure out what you wanted. Because here you can, for example, see that I have finally figured out through tutorials and whatnot how to get this texture on the lost type and how to do it, and it actually was super easy once you know how. But it's, as you can see, it's not really doing this same pattern on the sides. The sides look like they're, I don't even know how to say it, they're kind of, looks like there's a lot of lines in there. And these lines, originally I really, really wanted to have this stuff be textured all around and have the bricks go around. But for the life of me, I could not figure it out. So I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and keep going with the deviation, or with the image that I have in mind. And maybe I can figure it out a bit later, maybe once I have some more stuff in, maybe I can look at some more tutorials, who knows. But yeah, in the end, I couldn't. And I have since tried to get the stuff on the sites, and I have found a way to do so. It is not very straightforward, let me tell you. And it is, how do you say best, it's not very practical either. So the limitations of the program really come out there, and I'm not so sure how I'm going to use that in the future. At least I'm probably not going to use it in the way I had in mind for the next image, because I had I thought, a wonderful idea, but it doesn't really work. So yeah, you learn stuff and you learn the limits and you move on, and sometimes you will find a fix and sometimes you don't. And judging by the success of this image, it had a lot of appeal for a lot of people. And if I had now said, okay, I cannot get the sides of this fixed in a way that I want to, then in the end, nobody would have seen it and nobody would have been able to relate to it. And not one person who has seen the image has gone like, oh, well, the sides of those letters look off. So I think this is something to keep in mind. Mostly you're your own worst critic. So now for the inside of the O, for the second scene, basically, my original plan, and sometimes I'm getting tired of saying this, but my original plans hardly ever pan out, so there's no way around saying it. So the original plan was to have a complete image that just shows up in there. So basically it was planned as a 2-part thing, lost and found. So I wanted here the lighthouse and having everything come together as a big scene of which you can only see a tiny part when you look through the O. So now you can watch me try to put a bench and a few balloons in the scene. So the super master plan would have been to have the word found in the form of 3D balloons tied to the bench. But things turned out to be much more complicated than I thought, which now, looking back, thinking about it, is pretty straightforward actually. I mean, it's not so easy putting things in 3D, and if you do not have the models, you would need to somehow create the models, and creating the models in a 3D text in a balloon style, like inflated. I wasn't sure I was going to pull that one off. And after seeing how complicated it could be to arrange things in the 3D space if you're not used to it, I kind of kicked the idea to the curb again. Here you can see me trying to texturize the bench, and now trying to create some balloons, at least to check if I can do something with it. And yeah, it didn't quite work out the way I wanted to. Now I would say if I needed a balloon, I wouldn't need to use a pre-made one. I have meanwhile found out some of the extrusion tricks that you can do, but it's still getting them to be in the right shape. It would be really a pain. Here you can see me trying to arrange things in the 3D space without having the balloons overlap each other. And this is really super complicated. Here I'm just changing the view of the camera so I can look from each direction and see if they're in the same space, and they're always overlapping, and then the ties are not, the strings are not really at the same point. So I found a bunch of balloons to tie to the bench, going for, okay, maybe I can just write lost on the balloons. So now I'm rendering a bit to see how it will come out. Yeah, let's put it like this. It was an experiment, and at the stage I was at, it would have taken a lot more research and a lot more fiddling to make it work. And I simply wasn't really super convinced that this would be a good scene after all. So at some point you can see me starting to go back to the background and putting in a new sky and reflections and stuff like that. And with that, the 3D stuff looked so super out of place. I knew also then that it was a problem of the lighting of the bench and the balloons, but I had basically no clue how to really do this to make it really work. I would have had to do a lot in post just because I couldn't quite figure out how to do this. So here I'm trying to put some more realistic, some ripples in the reflection to make the reflection more realistic. Just so you know what I'm trying to do there. Not that anybody can see this in the end, but hey, sometimes you need to brush up on what you know. So here I'm laying in some of the shadows and highlights, and at least this is something I know how to do, but it still looks like shit. And then I put it as a smart object so that I can go back into the original composition, just so I can see what I'm aiming for. And this is something I really like to do a lot because it gives me direction, and otherwise I'm just going to quit at some point. It's not just learning new things when you kind of are tempted to quit. It's also these manifs that take a long time. You don't really think you're going to finish, and yeah. At this point, I should really admit to myself that I'm really abandoning the two-part idea and that I'm just going to get the middle part as the see-through part of the lost image and abandon the idea of a found image. But I'm actually not as far into it at the moment. I cannot admit to myself at this point that all this time fiddling with the inner stuff had been for nothing. So I'm kind of keeping it and thinking, okay, I'm doing something else around it now and seeing where it goes, and then maybe I can go back to the middle part. But yeah, after a few days on and off on this, and yeah, you're actually, remember you're watching this at the moment at 30 times the speed. So yeah, and you cannot see the breaks, and you cannot see the stock searching and the tutorial watching and so on, which at this point I'm no longer doing the 3D stuff, but yeah. So all of that, if I were honest to myself, I would admit that I'm abandoning it, but I'm not. So yeah, this is also something. Sometimes you just need some days to look at it and say, okay, this does look like shit. It's not just in my imagination. I can, for the life of me, not figure out how to make this work. Let's kill it. And other times you need to figure out, okay, maybe I should not kill it. Maybe I need to figure out a way to get there because the idea is just so cool. And I think being creative in any form, be it Photoshop or anything else, is a lot the choice between what you want to do, how you want to do it, and if you want to stick with something or if it's time to abandon something. And also with learning, sometimes you need to figure out, okay, this is good enough. Or if I watch a few more videos and follow some more tutorials, I can get some more insight into the techniques and I can actually make this a lot better, and I will be a lot happier with the outcome than if I just abandon it right here. And I think this is something that comes with time and with experience, and sometimes you just need a little bit of distance to figure it out. So if you have been staring at something for 5 hours straight, you can hardly make an informed decision about it. Yeah. And as I said, I was not ready to just abandon it, so I took another, I don't know how many hours to try and make something else with that. Abandoning maybe the idea of the balloons, but maybe having something else. So trying to figure out if I could get something else as a scene here that would work. But yeah, as you can see, I'm trying like a million different things, and here you can even see how I'm searching for my stock images. I'm doing a different crop, I'm doing a different thing in the foreground, and yeah, no matter what I do, I can see that in the lost image I will never see anything that I do on the right side of this, just because the O has this oval vertical shape, and everything I do, it will need to be something that stands on its own. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out what that might be without having to make compromises on what is seen in the lost scene. So yeah, I think at this point I had finally given it up. So I'm now back on my layers, going back to cutting stuff out, things that I know how to do, where I can see some sort of progress. And now I'm going in and trying to put some more light and shadows. Because obviously I did not, or I cannot, maybe nobody can, maybe it's just me, could not put the light on the painted elements. So I have to paint on those painted elements. And I'm also doing what I usually do. I use some gradients to put down some light. I use a brush to put some highlights on the lighthouse, on the other things around it. And here I'm going for this hazy bluish look in the background that I was trying to aim for. It's also a lot of experimentation. I mean, you should think that this is the part I know how to do, and that as long as I know what I want, I can easily do whatever. But the problem usually is not to know how to do it. At some point, the problem is knowing what you want to do. So this is basically the thing that is holding me back at some point. And that some things never look good enough, and that some things, I mean, I could now go back and say, I still don't like the sides of the text. But I have also learned to sometimes say, okay, enough is enough. It looks fine. It's not as prominent anymore as it was when it was just a text. We have all the different animals and the mushrooms and all the stuff surrounding it. And nobody will really look at that twice. And maybe it looks better like this because it's not so distracting if there's not so much texture on the sides. So with a deep sigh, at some point, you are finished. And then you upload it for the world to see. Sometimes people will like what you have created and sometimes they won't. Whatever you personally may now think of your work, remember, no one but you knows what is wrong with it. Point in case, I was totally unsure what would happen when I posted this on DeviantArt. I was nervous that all the time I'd been putting in would have been a waste and people could tell at once how much of a noob I was. Especially since I myself had been staring at it for so long, I could hardly see past the things I didn't really like. And instead, the image went on to the front page of DeviantArt and got so much attention like I haven't seen in a long time. But even if it hadn't, I have resolved not to change things once I upload them a long time ago. I try to incorporate any lessons learned, including any critique I receive, on my next image, and I always know there will be a next image. By the way, doing this video was also a learning experience for me. I'm trying to get a grip on After Effects and let's just say it will take some more time. After 3 months of working on this video, on and off, I'm allowing myself to stop fiddling and hit publish. Because sometimes you need to remember when to stop.